Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast. Lots to catch up on, as always. Never a dull few weeks in the world of Woking FC. And it's not just me you have to listen to this time. We're delighted to be joined by David Richardson, lifelong Woking fan, football journalist as well. I've told him he knows what he's talking about. He disagrees, but you will see as we run through the episode that he's a man that's in the know, certainly at non-league level, and obviously has good insights on Woking. So thank you for joining us, David. I think the first place to kick off, the last time we did an episode, Michael Doyle had left, but since then we've kind of got a whole new management team. Neal Ardley, what is your kind of thoughts on that? Is it the right appointment for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Jacob. It's good to be back on again. You've built me up quite big there, so I'm a little bit worried about what's to follow. But it's like one of those lone roulette signings that we've had over the years. But big shoes to fill in Glenn's absence. But yeah, very much a fan of the podcast and good to be talking about Woking as usual. But yeah, Neal Ardley, really good start. Obviously, really pleased with that appointment. I think it was about as well as we could have done, really. Obviously, a massively experienced manager, sort of almost one of those managers you see when he was at AFC Wimbledon and getting them into the Football League and then keeping them there in League One for a bit. And you sort of almost feel like you'd never see that kind of manager at Woking. Obviously, then he's managed a couple of non-league clubs in Notts County and Solihull, and now he's with us, and it sort of feels like a coup like that. Often you sort of get players along a similar vein that you sort of see years and years in the Football League, and then they end up at your club. So that's quite exciting, and obviously to have the start that he's had, 7 points from 9. Is a really great start, particularly when you factor in the defence we've had to field, the way the team was at rock bottom after the Gateshead defeat, a tough home game against Altrincham, and a local derby as well, where you never really know what's going to happen in that, particularly going to Aldershot. So to have an unbeaten start and 7 points is really good, and it's instantly sort of eased the pressure and got off on a good note. And equally Simon Bassey as well. I think that's really pleasing to see. Obviously knows Neal Ardley and worked with him before, but he knows these sort of levels inside out and knows a lot of players, and so that will be a really valuable asset. And of course Jody Brown too, as director of football. He's brought in 2 signings in the Effiong and Frank Vincent, who have made a big impact. Obviously now we've seen Aidan O'Brien join as well, another experienced player. So yeah, it's gone pretty much as well as it could have gone, to be honest. I think probably maybe in those 3 games we have had our fair share of good fortune. Sort of things have bounced our way, and the balls hit the post and stayed out. But equally, we've scored 7 goals in 3 games, which seems like is a huge turnaround. And so you would say that you've seen signs of improvement in those aspects, which undoubtedly we have. So yeah, really good start, and looks promising for the future. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. It's always tricky, I think, when you're looking at players or managers at this level. You're right. You can get ones like Woking's never going to be anyone's first choice, right? So it's tricky. I think it's always like you either go for one that's got no experience at this level, or you get someone who's failed multiple times at this level. And Ardley's kind of neither of those, really. I know those kind of non-league clubs you mentioned, York and stuff like that. There were issues there, but I think on the whole, his career's been brilliant. So I think it's really exciting for that reason, especially when you stack it up with. I mean, Daryl McMahon wasn't in the conversation for this time, but I think he was when Doyle came in. That's someone who's had a big budget at Dagenham multiple times and just never really done anything with it. So those kind of ones, it's like please not that. So no, it's exciting to see that, and I think he's a lot of the stuff he said so far has been really encouraging. I was actually going to say, when you mentioned kind of the riding our luck in those games, but I guess fortune favours the brave, and under Doyle we just weren't brave, right? I guess, and is that maybe the one thing that you've seen change? There's probably been a few things, and you can run through what you've seen change, but that kind of being a little bit braver has got to be one of them.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that, really, because under Doyle it sort of felt like every shot that we conceded from outside the box went in, and then you've probably had a couple you had one against Aldershot, or maybe two against Aldershot that hit the crossbar, and then you had one against Maidenhead that stayed out in a similar way as well. And yeah, I suppose that is sort of the things that do go for you. You know, it can happen like that. But yeah, I think probably we've certainly seen more attacking intent. I look at sort of like playing Buteman sort of in off the left. Obviously, it's not really his natural position, but he's such sort of like a clever and experienced player. He's good at getting on the ball. How many times have we sort of already seen him play that pass like inside for Effiong in the Altrincham game when he scored, and inside for Vincent when Effiong put in the rebound against Maidenhead. You know, he can sort of unlock teams like that. Whereas you might have maybe gone for sort of like a raw winger in Lewis, who just sort of flatters to deceive sort of most of the time. And, you know, he's got pace and he looks like he can beat a player, but then his sort of crosses don't really find anyone. And then you've coupled with that, you've sort of got Anderson, Vincent and Gorman in midfield, which probably they're all fairly similar players in a way. But that at the same time promotes attacking football, but also like being able to pass through midfield. You haven't really got like that traditional defensive midfielder that maybe Doyle was looking at Akinola to be, which is fine. But I think probably in the modern day, if Doyle was trying to play out from the back and play through midfield, you know, and you give the ball to Akinola, that's just not going to work because he's just not comfortable with it at his feet. So I think there's certainly been improvements like that. I think we've actually almost tried to play out of the back, almost sort of too much in the sense of the Maidenhead game, considering the conditions were so bad. It was sort of, at times it was quite painful seeing Akinola play the pass to Kelly Evans and him trying to sort of work it down the line or into midfield, because, you know, Maidenhead were really sort of going after us. But I thought that was really interesting what Neal Ardley said after the game, how if we want to try and play in this way, we've got to try and do it kind of at all costs to a certain extent, or sort of accepting that mistakes will happen whilst we're learning to do this. And obviously, you know, if you get the result at the end of the game as well, then you're kind of justified in saying that, because it is always about results. You know, we played pretty direct, effective stuff under Sarr, and for the most part that wasn't an issue because we were winning. So yeah, I think those are probably the changes we've seen. Obviously, like I said, Effiong and Vincent have made an impact. I'm looking forward to seeing Aidan O'Brien. I think that does give us a bit more sort of probably on the left, and probably spells the end for Conte and Denon Lewis, who I wouldn't have re-signed in the summer.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing. Probably, obviously, the players that are on loan, as you mentioned, those whose kind of contracts have come to an end because they were on short-term deals. You know, Judge and Moore have already moved on, but the loans, as you say, I just can't see clubs. You know, even if the loan runs for longer, they're going to probably agree to recall them at some point, because Conte has kind of he's been like on the bench and made, you know, had a couple of sub appearances. So it's not that he's injured, he's just really not fancied. And with signings like that coming in, you kind of think that if you're trimming the squad down, I think that's what Jody Brown said in an interview at the end of last week, was that we're looking to kind of get the numbers down. They kind of seem like easy targets. But a question I do have for you is kind of winners and losers so far, I guess, in terms of the players under Ardley. And Gorman seems like a real winner. It seems like something wasn't right between him and Doyle near the end, because he kind of got dropped and wasn't really playing, and there was seemed like a lot of frustration there. So he certainly seems one. Beautyman's another one. I don't think he was getting anywhere near enough minutes, and now we're starting to see, as you say, kind of assists and goals, and he's playing really well. But one of the kind of losers in inverted commas is kind of Andrews. I thought he looked really good under Doyle, and now he's kind of not really getting any minutes at all. But I guess that kind of setup in midfield that you were talking about, that is so important at the moment, he probably doesn't have a space in there, and we've kind of looked quite good. So I guess you can't really change it at the moment.
Yeah, I wonder whether Andrews or rather Anderson was preferred over at Andrews, really. Am I right in saying Vincent's also left-footed? So maybe having two left-footed midfielders in the middle, they thought maybe that might disrupt the balance a little bit. But yeah, like you say, Andrews was actually kind of one of the, I suppose, success stories under Doyle. He certainly had been improving throughout the season from when I first saw him, and seemed like he was getting better the more he played. Yeah, I think maybe he's just Anderson's got the nod, and obviously with Vincent coming in, it was kind of one of those things of sometimes when you sign a player, just seeing someone else in midfield sort of helps. So yeah, but I do think he's sort of got a role to play. I am perhaps slightly surprised, like you say, he hasn't played more minutes off the bench as well. I think, I'm surprised he sort of hasn't been getting maybe like 25, maybe even 30 minutes off the bench. But again, I think Ardley was sort of saying that he didn't want to disrupt things too much, and stuff like that. But yeah, in terms of winners, like you say, Dale Gorman is that was the best game I've seen him play against Maidenhead. Just sort of totally different from under Doyle. He sort of seems sort of at peace almost. I don't know whether that's sort of right thing to say, but he's sort of not arguing with referees or his teammates. He's just focusing on his game or the game, and sort of just doing trying to do the simple things right, and pass forward more as well. His position hasn't really sort of changed than what he was playing under Doyle. He still seems pretty deep to me in midfield and getting it off the defence. So I think that probably that improvement is the instructions and tactics from Ardley and simplifying that aspect of the game. Obviously, I suppose with playing a back four instead of a three, there's a different dynamic with that, so that might help him as well. Perhaps there's more space for him without three at the back. But I think, yeah, that's a really promising sign to see him, and I think that's what we all wanted to see, really. That we're now seeing that player that we all thought we were going to get from Barnet. So that's really promising, and I think he would be one who, when Ardley came in, thinks, oh, we've got a proper manager here, who really sort of knows what we're doing. And I think it's harsh to say that it was all Doyle's fault that Gorman wasn't playing to his potential, because Doyle didn't say to Gorman, I'll go out there and argue with referees and pick up silly yellow cards and sort of do brainless things that we'd been seeing. But at the same time, the manager didn't get the best out of him in terms of performances and what he wanted them to try and do. So yeah, really, really pleased with that. And I think Anderson and Vincent have been a good four for him. They get through plenty of work in the midfield, and that sort of modern day holding midfielder really has to be sort of comfortable on the ball and be able to play passes, and I think Gorman can do that. So yeah, that's definitely a positive. Obviously, Effiong's been a big winner, sort of come in. Obviously, played that game against Gateshead, but since he's been sort of the focal point up top, he's really sort of dominated like we always knew he would. We probably haven't seen sort of too much in terms of the defence. Obviously, Will Jaskalainen's been outstanding still as well. But I think maybe Harries and Akinola have probably found it difficult at the back, equally with Kelly Evans and Chickson too. But again, I think that's more sort of the style and trying to be braver in terms of playing out. It's not easy just to do that straight off the bat, particularly in some of the conditions we've seen recently. And I think we need reinforcements at the back as well, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But yeah, that's sort of everything off the top of my head, really. There's obviously some players that you kind of hope that you look forward to see how they'll get on when they come back, like Max Dyche. I've sort of, to be honest, I'm not sort of been a huge fan of him, which might surprise some people. He sort of reminds me of that Josh Staunton type when we got relegated under Limbrick, who sort of claps his hands and sort of makes the odd big tackle, but actually he's kind of at fault for a lot of things as well. So I'm looking forward to see how he does. I think he will come back in, and I think he is a bit better than Akinola on the ball. So in theory, that's why he should start again. Also, Ben Winter. I'm not sure about Kelly Evans at right back. I don't think he's really good enough for this level. I thought he got forward well against Maidenhead, but I think equally he gets targeted defensively down that side, particularly when you've got Akinola on as the right side of centre back as well. So I think there probably is a spot for Ben Winter to try and get himself back in the team, but from what we saw under Doyle, it wasn't particularly convincing. So that's one player that you'd look to again. But yeah, beyond that, I'm not sure there's too much else really. Perhaps
that
rolling in.
defense.
Is there a
Well,
way
yeah,
for rolling in?
potentially, yeah. I mean, he, funnily enough, warmed up for a couple of minutes and took all his training gear off, and then was going to come on in the trophy game, and then he didn't. He sat back down. I don't know why, and then he didn't come on in the end. So it looked like he was going to kind of come back under Doyle. But you're right. Some of them, players that have been injured for a long time, and people, Effiong and Vincent and players like that, it's kind of almost hard to say they've improved because, as you say, they were there for one game, so that's true. But the defence is one area that is, by this time next month, I think that back four could look completely different. Obviously, if Moss comes back, I don't think we've got a massive time frame on that, but it sounds like he is going to come back at some point this season. As you say, Dyche and Winter, and it might be that there's signings there. So it seems like that back four is probably going to change quite a bit, which probably needs to happen because we have kind of got away with it in the last few games. You can't do that every week. It's great to create more chances, but we're kind of giving up quite a lot. So I guess there's going to be quite a lot of work going on there. And I guess that's the thing. I don't know, kind of, if you have a sense of how much turnover there's going to be. It kind of feels like there's already been quite a bit since Jody Brown came in, but I don't know if your kind of thoughts on the ownership. Obviously, they want to guide the club to safety, but I don't know if you kind of got an idea of how many people they might want to bring in or get rid of. It seems like there's quite a lot of work that could be done, but it'd be interesting to see, I guess, how much work they kind of actually do.
Yeah, I think it will largely almost be viewed in some ways as sort of starting from scratch. To be honest, sort of you're inheriting a squad of players. Some obviously well and you know what they can do, and I think that's almost why you've seen that same 11 from Neal Ardley and like the experience of putting Buteman in. You don't have to play him off the left side because that's not his normal position, but you kind of, it's a honest sort of experienced player who you think you can trust. But I think sort of beyond that, it's quite clear that they need to reshape things. To have as many players as we had at the end of Doyle's reign was just unbelievable, really. And that number just like isn't sustainable for anyone. So I think particularly this month we'll see changes, and I think it is definitely has to be viewed as rebuilding now for next season and beyond. I think we saw that obviously with Effiong signing an 18-month deal. I mean, that could have been to the end of the season. Obviously, that might not have been as attractive to him. But you have to start looking beyond. And I think obviously the expectation is that we stay up, which I think is very achievable. And probably the hope is that we rebuild during the season, and so we get to the summer where we sort of know where we stand with a lot of things, and we've moved on some players and brought others in that we know that we would want for the long term. So yeah, there's loads of work to be done both on the pitch and off it. But I think certainly from what we've seen so far, I think you look at the impact Effiong and Vincent have made, and then you look at the pedigree of O'Brien, and you'd think that's 3 really good signings straight away. So that's certainly a positive, and I mean, it's quite easy really to look through that squad and see what needs to change. And we've already seen that with like the likes of Dion Moore, his contract ending and being moved on. So I think plenty more changes to come. It will just be a little bit of process probably in the 3 weeks of finding out what you can do.
I guess your point is summed up by just how many strikers there were at the club about a month ago, but none of them scored any goals. It was just, as you say, such an inflated squad. But that just really highlights, I guess, with strikers, it's quite easy to kind of assess their impact. How many goals and assists are you getting? And there just wasn't any of either going on at that time. And so it's good. I think a lot of those obviously were loan players. Or ones or like, as you say, like Dion Moore, where you can just move them on. I think he's dropped a couple of levels already, so it's kind of, it makes sense. That kind of makes me actually, I'm not going to say feel sorry for Doyle necessarily, but if you think about where he picked us up, kind of in a really bad position, and then kind of what happened over the summer, and then kind of almost as soon as the kind of ownership changed, he lost his job. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of bad things he did, but he must be a little bit miffed, kind of, because I guess the reason why we had such an inflated squad is because they were just buying players, hoping that some of them would come good, and it just turned out that not many of them did turn out that well, and now obviously we're trying to get rid of them. So I guess, and I guess he signs those players, but I guess it was kind of, trying to bring players in that might turn into something on a really, really cheap wage and short-term deals and that kind of stuff.
I think there was obviously a difficulty, as we've sort of heard, maybe sort of in the weeks and days since Dorr left, and even before, with sort of the Ben Turner interview, which will sort of be one of those like classic sort of moments that we'll look back on, I feel like. But obviously I think there was difficulties really in knowing sort of where they stood in terms of the budget and finances. They didn't really know what money was there to be spent, because obviously things were or are changing behind the scenes, and there just wasn't that sort of direction at all, which is why we saw like the likes of sort of Dion Moore and obviously like Matt Ward, who wasn't sort of signed on until like a couple of weeks into the season, I don't think. Likes of those sort of players that you were picking up because they'd been with the club during pre-season, but you kind of knew that they weren't good enough. Obviously Matt Ward's turned into a real star, and he did look that way before, but the likes of Moore and a couple of others clearly weren't up to the level. But then at the same time, it's like, well, how do you have 27, 28 players on the books if you've got no money? So that's sort of the thing. But I don't know. If it's not sure, we should do the whole root and branch review into the Doyle era again. But I think he was probably just almost not honest enough with us about the situation, in the sense of, on the opening day of the season, when we were probably the only country not to be able to fill a bench, that should have set alarm bells ringing, particularly for himself. And he probably should have come out after that Altrincham game, after what was probably a, I don't know, fairly respectable 1-0 defeat. Or they did go down to 10 men, didn't they? But so did we in the end. But he probably should have come out after that game and said, look, this is like where we're at, basically. But he didn't. And then by the time Ben Turner did that interview, it was kind of too late. It was, no one was going to be turned by what anyone was saying at that point. And while some of the things that he said did ring true, although it may have been clouded by his sort of insistence on how well the team did in the final couple of months of last season, it was just too late. And also it was your assistant manager saying this, so it was kind of like, this is just all like totally ridiculous now. You'd never have heard Steve Thompson coming out under Gary Hilton saying, oh, we need more money, or the budget isn't good enough, or the budget's been cut, or whatever. It was always Gary Hill doing that. That's what the manager does. So that was sort of like the issue of it. Obviously there was many issues, from recruitment, tactics, and the post-match interviews. And I think Michael Doyle will look back on this as like an amazing learning experience in a lot of ways for whatever he does next, because he really was thrown into the deep end. And ultimately he'll probably look back on it and say, he kept the team up, and then when he left, the team wasn't in the relegation zone, and I kind of left because there was all these takeover things going on. Do you know what I mean? You can always spin it in that way, can't you? So yeah, it's sort of time to sort of draw a line sort of under all that now, and sort of look forward, because Todd Johnson seems really, really impressive. I really like the way obviously he's come in, and he's got a director of football in, and he's reshaping the board. There's obviously loads of things to do behind the scenes as well, because as we know, the club's sort of been on its knees for the best part of 6 months, if not longer, and there's a lot to do in terms of sort of re-engaging the fan base, but ultimately that all sort of comes with results on the pitch. And so far we've been getting those under Neal Ardley, so long may it continue, really.
Yeah, and you mentioned the new ownership, although there's not been an official announcement on the club website, but that's potentially because there's been so many other things going on at the same time. That like barely a few days go past where we don't sign someone, appoint someone, something happens, there's a game. So it's been tricky to do it, but I'm assuming it's all kind of gone to plan. Obviously, we started to see him starting to do stuff, Todd Johnson in the background, but kind of on the ownership, now it's arrived. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of stuff happening, which is great, and obviously there's been some good results on the pitch as well, which is good, but the off the pitch stuff looks good as well with the appointments there. What do you think he's learned, obviously in his spells, slightly different positions, at Wildstone and Dagenham. So obviously he knows the league. But what do you think he kind of learnt in those roles that he can bring into Woking?
Yeah, I think that's really important that he's been around those clubs. I know sort of on paper it kind of looks like, oh, you've been at two National League clubs for not very long periods of time, and obviously we don't have any idea what went on and why he moved on from those clubs. But fact of the matter is, he would have seen all the goings on and been in those board meetings for hours on end and had those sort of discussions about how things work. And I think that all just stands him in really good stead for us, basically. And now he's got control over a football club, which is probably clearly what he would have wanted. So he can do things his own way, but obviously, you know, this isn't something he can just do alone and all himself. That's why he's brought in a director of football. That's why he's reshaping the board to how he wants it. And there'll be other sort of little things as well that will help all of that work out. So I think he's got a sort of very clear plan, and there's none of this sort of like 3-year plan thing, which is like just completely ridiculous and annoying, and we've sort of seen it time and time again, and often it sort of ends in a relegation or a relegation battle. So he just seems to be going about things in the right way, and obviously it's been frustrating that the takeover hasn't happened sooner, and even now I think we're still waiting for the shares to be exchanged or whatever, and the you know, the sort of documents to be signed off and all that, and for it to go through on Companies House. But you know, the early signs are really promising, and I think you will look at it and see like there's a lot to be done on and off the field, but it's just like a great opportunity to try and build something up again, and he's putting all the sort of the groundwork and the foundations in to be able to do that. So that's really exciting. You know, it's a shame that we had such a big investment from Drew Volk that basically has been wasted to a certain extent, in the sense that we haven't achieved that promotion like he wanted to, and you know, the ground is largely the same, barring sort of some signage and food outlets that it's always been, because you did feel like, you know, this was sort of almost as good as we've ever had it, basically, in terms of money going into the club. So I think when you look at it from that sort of point of view, we're lucky that we've got someone else coming in who is prepared to clearly invest and try to take us forward. Obviously, we don't know to what extent, but clearly when you're hiring a manager like Neal Ardley and you're also getting a director of football, and he's not doing it on the cheap. So yeah, really good signs. Obviously, I think in terms of sort of chief executive and who runs the club day to day, that obviously still needs to be sorted out, I should think, because I'm not too sure about the current CEO. I don't, to be honest, I don't really know too much about him, but you know, whether he will stay or whatever. I imagine these are sort of the things that Todd Johnson kind of works out in these early few weeks and months. So that'll probably be one thing, but you know, I'm sure we'll hear about that when the time's right. But very exciting for sure, and yeah, probably very grateful at the same time, really, that we've got someone to try and take us forward, like I said.
Yeah, I think given kind of when the stuff was going on in the summer, to think we're in this position, as you say, it has dragged on, and that's kind of been frustrating. But to think we're in the position we're in now, after, you know, only 6 months or something, after, you know, being in a real hole, it's certainly a great turnaround, and that we'll probably see the results of that on the pitch as well. Hopefully a much better second half of the season. You talked about the previous ownership a bit there, and that was actually something I was thinking about kind of a few weeks ago, kind of standing around Kingfield, kind of looking around at stuff, and as you say, it's the same as it's ever been, really, other than kind of the fan zone area and a few bits and pieces moved around after all that money was spent. But I think Drew was quite clear it was all going to go on the team, really, with that one aim of getting promotion, and everything would follow that. You know, once we've got that, obviously we never did, What kind of lessons do you think someone like Todd Johnson will take from Drew's time at the club? Because he's probably been following it very closely if he's been at this level, and obviously he's been around for quite a few months already in the process of trying to take over stuff. So he'll have a good idea of kind of what's been going on. Infrastructure is one thing you mentioned. Do you think that's going to be a key difference between the two kind of ownerships?
Yeah, I think obviously you kind of need people to spend your money in the right sort of way. You can't, like I say, you can't do it all by yourself, and that's why he's got really experienced manager in like Neal Ardley and the director of football to also help with that. And then you need a sort of nous on the off-field stuff of where's this money going as well. We sort of saw with Drew Volk, obviously John Katz was running the show, and it was sort of a, I suppose, one-man band in terms of the snap decisions and how things were done. And clearly, when it all sort of came to a head at the start of 2024, I think that was kind of when there was a couple of sort of shareholders meetings or certain things, and Drew Volk was sort of over in the country when it was all kind of falling apart, when we didn't sort of get that new manager bounce from Doyle. I think then it sort of penny dropped a little bit that things hadn't been done in the right way, and or maybe the right decisions hadn't been taken, or the sensible decisions, and that kind of lack of experience really shone through in that moment. And it all really sort of started when Sarr was sacked and we had Ian Dyer, and we had that sort of ridiculous kind of 6 weeks of limbo where we clearly didn't really know what we were doing. I don't know whether the plan was that, hopefully Ian Dyer could like get some results and steady the ship, kind of like he did when Dowson went. Obviously that didn't happen, and like the whole situation worsened, and we were still sort of trying to work out who to appoint. And then in the end, you appointed a manager who, from a management point of view, that no one had heard of, basically. So I think that was probably the biggest thing, and just in terms of experience. Obviously, Todd Johnson's experienced non-league, but he doesn't have all the years that Neal Ardley has, or Jody Brown has, or other people like that. So it's getting those people around you that can fill in the gaps of knowledge that you don't have, basically. But yeah, and I mean, in terms of how he spends the money, that's one for him. We shouldn't really sort of be the one saying you should do this and that. I think often with these things, like we say, like when you get the results on the pitch, everything else seems to fall into place. Obviously, we'd love for the ground to be redeveloped. It seemed like we had our big chance with that a few years ago, when we decided to appoint Wayne Gold, which was clearly a huge mistake. So yeah, we don't really know where we are on that, but maybe there's more pressing things to sort out off the pitch first before we get to that stage again, and revisiting all of that if we even can. So yeah, we'll have to see, but I'm sure at some point when the time's right and all the sort of documents and paperwork have gone through, Todd Johnson will sort of address everything and sort of put it all out there. But we'll just have to wait and see for that one.
Yeah, no, although he can hire us as advisors on how to spend his money if he really wants us.
That would set alarm bells off.
It could be a fun thing, but yeah, no, it's always an interesting one. Actually, you mentioned the ground, and it's that's always the big thing, and the limitations to it. I mean, you could do a whole 5-hour podcast about why it's so difficult to do stuff and why stuff hasn't happened in the past. But I have kind of been looking at some of the grounds in this league. Some of them are they have done work to them, and it's not been substantial kind of long-term kind of infrastructures that have been built. There's some that feel very temporary. Barnet is one I always go to. I'm not saying our ground should be like Barnet's before anyone accuses me of saying that, but it seems like every time you go there, they've like taken it down and rebuilt it, and it's like a different configuration to what it was before. And it's just quite interesting that maybe you'd have to build a brand new ground in the middle of nowhere and have a certain kind of approach to it to be able to do that. But kind of that Eastleigh,
need a few more weddings at Kingfield, don't we?
Well, that's where we're going with this.
Barnet.
That's definitely where I would get married if I.
No, but you are right though, in sort of in terms of like it's like that legacy thing. Really, you kind of look at where will we be in 20 years' time? What will have changed? And I always think back to Billericay under Glenn Tamplin, which was obviously like a complete circus, and complete nonsense for quite a long time, and sort of that big story in non-league, and you know, he spent a fortune on the team, but actually he spent a fortune on the ground as well. And you look now at their stadium, they've got a 3G pitch. I think they've got another one sort of like out the back kind of thing that they like can train on as well. And you look at their sort of hospitality things, and you think like that's a really good setup for a club of that size at that level. And that's, you know, I know they had all that, yeah, like I say, nonsense that went on there for quite a period of time, and it was embarrassing. But then, you know, time kind of heals and you move on, and then you think, oh, actually, we've kind of got quite a nice ground now out of this. And, you know, once you cover up the graffiti and repaint the changing room walls and stuff like that, yeah, it's really tidy. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the pipe dream really for us, and kind of always has been, along with getting in the Football League.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, always seems to be tricky on both fronts. So what are you hoping for, I guess, between now and the end of the season? I guess it would be for us to kind of get enough you know, wins so that we're looking maybe upwards rather than downwards, going you know, further into the season, and probably not having to be looking at the bottom spots in the table and kind of following all their scores, you know, to the minute like we were doing last season, kind of panicking for the last few months. So I guess that's going to be one key thing, but rebuilding the squad as well as we go. So there's some work that's put in before the summer. Sounds like something as well that you'd like to see kind of go on before the season's out.
Yeah, I think we could do without stressing about 52 points on the final day of the season like last year, which kind of was ridiculous in the end. But yeah, hopefully, obviously, stay up is kind of like the bare minimum. And then sort of beyond that, you hope that we're carrying some sort of momentum on the pitch in terms of heading into next season, sort of finish quite strongly. Yeah, mid-table, that sort of area. And with that, I think, you know, if you're getting those sort of results and you're seeing that upturn, I think the squad will have been changed and reshaped as well. So hopefully we've made a couple more good signings, got rid of 4 or 5 players, and sort of know where we stand heading into the summer really, and just try and get that feel good factor so that we can have another sort of rebuild in the summer, and really sort of give it another good go next season, to be honest. But yeah, certainly the signs that of the last couple of weeks feels like a much longer really, but it's only kind of been, I don't know, maybe less than a month, hasn't it, or 3 weeks since Neal Ardley's been here. It seems a long time, and it already seems like a lot's happened and a lot's changed. So yeah, I think more change to come. But yeah, hopefully stay in the league and look forward to next season.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 52 points there. I think Bournemouth went down on 52 last season. That's right, isn't it? I think obviously we got just more than that. What do you think it's going to be like this season? It seems like Ebbsfleet are obviously, they could be relegated by like February by the way they're going, I guess. But what do you make of the rest of the team down there? Do you think it's going to be that tight again?
It could be. I think maybe I'd be surprised if the team went down with 52 points again. I think it's not quite as sort of, obviously Ebbsfleet are gone. It's not sort of quite cut and dry yet in terms of Boston second bottom. They're kind of adrift, but not sort of dead and buried yet. And then sort of above that, Fylde, Maidenhead, Braintree, Wealdstone. I think that'll be a bit of a bun fight right until the end, and then it's all the shot on us. So you know, we're still not a million miles away from it. When you look at the league table, you'd hope that Tamworth with their FA Cup run might get distracted and get dragged down into it. Dagenham have obviously changed their manager. You don't know how that's going to go, and there's sort of always sort of a team a little bit beyond them that will sink and somehow get dragged into it as well. I'd be surprised if there was a team going down with 52. I think probably you might stay up with 48 or 49 points this season. But yeah, it's not going to be a pleasant sort of viewing if we're still in there heading into sort of April time really. I think it's 3 big games coming up. Yeovil away, Ebbsfleet at home is obviously a must win, and Hartlepool away as well. I think Yeovil's winnable. They've dropped off a little bit in the last few games, I think. Although it's away, so you never really know what you're going to get from that. Like I say, Ebbsfleet have to win. And then Hartlepool have picked up as well, but against these sort of sides that are always sort of like 3 or 4 points away from the playoffs, like we saw against Altrincham, you can beat them. They are winnable games. So I think 4 points minimum really from the next 3. 6 would be good, and then 7 great, or 7 plus great. So yeah, kind of another big month now really, and then I think our run sort of stiffens up a little bit and becomes a bit harder. So we need to get those points on the board and start giving ourselves a bit of a cushion. And then a small matter of getting to Wembley as well.
Yeah, could well, yeah. We're recording this on Sunday night. That could all be over by Tuesday evening or something. But we will see how it goes with interest. And yeah, no, it should be an exciting second half of the season. Funny you talk about kind of time flying. I was looking the other day at that Ben Turner interview that you mentioned. That was the 12th of December. And we're only on the 5th of January, so it's not even a month since that went out yet. And that just seems like another world that took place in.
Dark times.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy everything that's happened since then. But obviously, you probably knew that the writing was on the wall once that happened. So, but yeah, there's been a lot of good stuff since then. So that's what we like to see. Well, thank you for joining us, David. It's been a pleasure to have you, as you say, back on the show. You've been on before,
Thank you.
and I'm sure you'll be on again because there'll be fans campaigning, I'm sure, to have you back on. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Big thank you to David for joining us. Really interesting chat. Great to have him on the pod, and hopefully we'll get him back soon as well as the season goes on. What we want to do in the second half is just look at some listeners' questions. So thank you to those that sent them in via X/Twitter. And we'll just run through those now to round off this episode. So the first question was from Trevor Smith. A very positive one. I think from him, is it possible that we can still make the playoffs this season? Great question. I guess mathematically there's no reason why not, but still there's a lot of work to be done on this squad. You look at the recent games. We've done really well to pick up points. We've been quite lucky, probably cashing in our luck that we've not had earlier in the season. But yeah, this team still feels miles off at the moment, and they probably will be for most of this season. But getting safe and starting to build towards next season is going to be the big thing. And you never know. Obviously, if you go on a run of games, mathematically you might still be able to do something later on in the season. But I think you saw with games like Altrincham, obviously we beat them. I think you could see the way they were playing was, really great style of football, and they look really effective. So, we look kind of miles off that at the moment. So yeah, we'll enjoy it the run whilst it lasts. But yeah, we probably best to not get carried away too soon. And I think next season is certainly going to be the one where, not saying we're necessarily aiming for the playoffs next season, but it does feel like if we can build the squad this season and in the summer, then yeah, start on a kind of a fresh next season and go from there. But in a way, I guess it's a shame that the kind of takeover took so long to happen. If it happened maybe a couple of months ago and we start to make these changes then, who knows where we could have been now. But I think for now it's all about picking those points up and moving away from the bottom. And actually the final point on that is, I guess, looking upwards, not downwards, is always nice. You never want to kind of just be marooned mid-table coming towards the end of the season, so I guess you always want something to kind of be looking up towards rather than fighting for survival. But yeah, very, very positive question there. So yeah, we like those. We'll balance those out with some negative topics, I'm sure somewhere along the way. From Jack, thank you, Jack, for sending your questions in. What position do we need to strengthen in? I guess you could look across the whole squad really and give ideas. I don't think we're necessarily going to be able to do that. One key area I think so far has been up front, where we've seen kind of attacking areas. Vincent is quite an attacking midfielder. Obviously, Innie. And the signing as well the other day of O'Brien as well. So yeah, I think that end of the pitch, obviously there's been a lot of focus there, but the defence for me, I mean, at the moment, obviously, I think there's rumours that Odyssey is out for the season. Dyche is surely going to come back soon. I mean, Winters, not really played that much this season. Moss is out. I'm not too sure when he's coming back. The left back options, I'm not massively positive on. So I think that's kind of the area I think we're going to have to look at. And as we alluded to in the last question, we've rode our luck. I think Jaskalainen player of the month. I think that's kind of what we need to say on those things. So yeah, there's certainly some areas, but it might be that we can't do them midway through the season is a difficult time to go out there and start building the squad. But yeah, I think if there's players out there that we think can improve the team, and they're gettable for whatever reason, then go out and get them. Obviously, it's weird at this level. O'Brien's one, obviously, is coming over from Ireland, where their league has ended. Innie was kind of released from Braintree because they'd kind of overspent and were cutting costs and stuff like that. So you do get some really interesting options that pop up, but don't sign players for the sake of signing them. I think that's probably what we've learned in the last few years, because we've already got a big enough squad. So we don't want to inflate it too much with players that again won't be in favour. The second question from Jack: who do you need to let go and move on? Yeah, it does sound like, for anyone that hasn't heard the interview with Jody Brown on BBC Surrey Sport, he wants to have a team of, or a squad of 22 ideally. I think that's probably a bit ambitious for this season. But yeah, I think a lot of the loanees, I think, will probably return. A lot of those are kind of the forward players. Stretton has gone back already. People like Leahy, I'd expect to as well. Conte, another one. Obviously, we've just extended Chickson, I think, to the end of the season. I think Dyche is here for the season anyway, so not really including them in that. Again, I think Lewis Walker's an interesting one, actually. I think if we could get him a loan into the Conference South, we might have to pay some of his wages if he has to drop to a part-time team. But that's another one I think that I would probably try and get off the books, because I don't really see much of a role for him in this team. I think he's been very poor. But it's to be expected. I don't think he's ever got that many goals at this level. I think there's other options we could be looking at there, and he certainly won't be starting unless something happens to Innie. And his final question from Jack: why did Doyle persist with kind of putting square pegs in round holes? It's always interesting when you see the kind of downfall of a manager, looking back and seeing the things they got hung up on. Douse and Sala. It was all things that they kind of stuck to and were kind of stubborn on. I think that, the thing with Doyle was that he was just didn't know his best team, and was kind of constantly chopping and changing things, hoping that he would find something that worked. And ultimately it never really did. Kind of moving players around to try and make things work, I think was what he was trying to do. But I don't think we got much success from that. But yeah, sometimes the stubbornness from managers can be a part of their downfall. And actually, that is kind of a good segue, I guess, into a question from Sam Fisher. Dale Gorman obviously has improved quite a bit in the last few weeks. He says, was it the previous manager or himself that was kind of holding him back? Well, yeah, I guess there's elements of both there. So I think there was probably disagreements about playing style and the roles and the tactics and all of those kind of things. Obviously, you'd expect someone like Gorman to be speaking up on those kind of things, and I don't think they probably saw eye to eye on them. And then that's probably why you see a bounce from the player. So it's been really good to see Gorman kind of improving in recent weeks, but he had looked very frustrated, for large parts of the start of the season. So hopefully that's all behind him now, and he can really focus on his role and helping the team. Because as we've seen in the last few weeks, he's a real asset. And obviously, you don't play in the Barnet side that he was in if you're not. So yeah, that's brilliant to see that. And Sam's other point was kind of talking about how kind of toxic the dressing room must have been, and how the turnaround has maybe shown that. Well, we'll never know, I guess, on those things. But that always happens, whatever level you're looking at when a manager leaves. That's why you so typically get new manager bounces. They happen at all levels. They don't always happen. Kind of, we didn't really get one, I guess, when Doyle came in. So they're not. It's not foolproof that they're always going to happen. But I think if you've got, even if it's a handful of players that are kind of not happy with the tactics and the roles and formations and all of those kind of things, when a new manager comes in with a fresh slate, I think that's such a refreshing thing for the team. So that's kind of all behind us now, and it's good to see that players can all stake their claim. And if they're all starting afresh, then then anyone could kind of play their way back in and get a chance. So that's yeah, that's been good to see as well. George Tarrant as well sent a question in again about players to offload in January. We kind of ran through those ones already, but actually one of the more interesting things is looking at players that we might try and keep on for next season, and that's kind of an area which I guess we're going to have to start thinking about pretty soon, really, because it's you know, as you get towards the end of the season, you know, players start to think about what they're going to be doing. So it's hard to see at the moment. I don't think there's too many players that are contracted on for next season. So I think we'll have to see. But you know, again, everyone's got a chance, as we said, to prove to the manager kind of why they deserve to be here. And we'll wait and see kind of what the ownership say and what their aims are going to be. But if they're looking at competing more towards the top end of the table, then, you know, if there's players they don't think that they can, you know, help them get there, then you know, then it might be time to move them on. I think that's something that we certainly have to look at in the second half of the season. That could make it a really interesting second half of the season where players are kind of really staking their claim and pushing forwards to secure a new deal. And if they want to stay here and be a part of it, then yeah, that'd be really interesting. So that is, I think, all of the questions that we got in for this episode. So thank you for everyone that's sending those in. If you want yours to be included next time, then keep an eye out on Twitter and X for when we put the call out for questions. But always feel free to tweet any questions in the meantime. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.